wanted to talk about a few things just to make a video. Um, just got done watching The Shack, 2017. I'm sorry, no, 2007. I think it was made. Let me take a look here again. The movie was made. It doesn't say either. Anyway, it's like 2010. Look here, it says yeah, it is 2017, so it wasn't too long ago. So I wanted to make this video because it's a very good movie. It's a good Christian movie, good Jesus movie. They don't ever make movies like that, too many of them anymore, which is really great. Has a pretty multiverse, racial movie, and not to overdo it with too much Christianity, but it's a strong, paramount foundation and base for that. Of a man that has a daughter that dies, and it's a very heartfelt movie. I think I've seen it maybe before, but it was so long ago. Sometimes I watch movies over and not even realize that I've seen the movie before. Yeah, I thought it was a great movie. So anyway, I don't know who's placing these roaches, but there's all these fucking roaches all over the fucking place, and I don't know who's placing them. Anyway, needed to make a video because there were some things that were kind of bothering me, and I thought, thought about, Frankie, and seeing Sarah laugh at the Mexican grocery store as she's trying to face like Frankie's room or my dead sister trying to take ownership. I know exactly what she's doing. This person is one of the most disgusting vampire blood-sucking parasite to feed off the energy and emotions that doesn't belong to her, only for the wrongdoing, for her selfish greeds. And I think to myself, nobody knows this story about what had happened to Frankie. Because let's just say Frankie is not in good health. He has now had a stroke. He had a brain hemorrhage. He had something wrong happen to him that has left him mentally decapitated. Let's just say that's what's happened, and it's being kept from me and everyone else, or most of us. And for whatever reasons, how are they going to look at me to think I want to take something from him? How are they going to look at my mother's twins to say they want to take advantage of him to take away? Because no one understands the brutality of what Frankie went through. No child at that magnitude of Michael Jackson should deal with that level of punishment, that level of abuse. I mean, you gotta, there wasn't cameras and there wasn't recording devices, even I think in the most important situations. Like when me and my father committed suicide, Frankie did not like Sarah. Frankie was, like, when we were inside our house and there was a huge argument, and Frankie had to threaten Sarah to stop bad-mouthing my mother and not to harass our family. And I was there in the kitchen when it all happened. And, I didn't really understood. I just knew that this person wasn't doing something good. I just didn't know exactly what the fuck they wanted. And, you know, at that time to me, it was just like, you know, oh, they're white, you know, she comes from a white husband, they're educated, they're likely to know the American rules and laws to help, right? Because America's known to help the poor than many other countries, and help those that are in need. Because obviously you have all these foreign people coming into the U.S. because their other countries are so much full of shit. There's not enough of good to give a proper share to everyone. So a lot of people go into the U.S. for a better life, but no, it's so sad whenever they're gonna lie. I know I couldn't say probably this more to the core of my soul. They're gonna lie about what happened to Frankie, and that's coming from the president and the psychologist of what the brutality of it, how barbaric that shit was. They want this to. They made this about Sarah. They made this about Ken. They made this, made this about Kenneth. This is all this was about. And when you, okay, before I go any further, the fact that my mother's triplets and I have 2 sets of identical twins, and I'm the only straight kid, and I met Michael Jackson, that puts me, when you are around heterosexual females, that drives them absolutely lusting crazy toward me, to a man, because she knows that this man who has decently good genetics is very likely to give birth to identical twins. What couple in the world, any couples, doesn't want identical twins? Everyone's want identical twins. They're all cute, whether they're gay or straight or whatever. Everybody wants identical twins as kids. All women want that, It's like nearly all women, because it's like a special bonus. Sorry, I had to do a farmer's blow, but the reason I say this, is because, the brutality about what Frankie went through is, I feel so overwhelmed in the idea that that type of suffering, because you don't understand how nasty Sarah was and how parasitical and calculating this motherfucker was and that family. They know they're the head runners to deal with the trash, to give it to Madison and Kenneth. Kenneth calculated this almost as equal to his own mother, to Sarah Cooper. But it's very difficult, because the way that when we were talking to Frankie, like I'd go to Frankie and I'd say, hey, what happened with Sarah, or what happened with Robert, or whatever, and she goes, yeah, man, fuck her, man, she wants to control Dad, and she wants to control Mom and shit, fuck her. And he was saying those exact words to me, like, I'm talking, it was for real. It was for real. It wasn't going shooting target practice at a fucking gun range. No, it's fucking for real. It was the intensity of the environment of having to deal with, like, my father's brain dead, and there's a house, and Sarah and Ken were after Frankie and after my mother, and what I saw Sarah and Ken do to my mother in front of her was unbearable to watch in real life. I mean, there was one black woman sitting at the front desk when I talked about this, that she put her foot down, like, to make sure, and she saw them coming. I talked about this so many times, and this was not holy. This was not because I want to fix your life. This wasn't because this is an excuse to get a free ride. This is what it was. It's easy to point the fingers. It's easier to point the fingers, but it is the truth. Does it matter? It doesn't matter. I have gray hair. I'm old. The pure nectar, the innocence of a child, of a world imagination, of a world of imagination, creativity, wonder, questioning, everything around them, absorbing their environments, is to have that nectar, to have that stripped from you, is so pure and so toxic that you can't replace that. You can't replace it. And not only for Frankie having to go through that as a child, because guys, I saw the shit. I come home from school and I would see his eyes red, and you could tell that he was thinking about the shit every time he was walking home. When you try to develop friends and you have full grown ass adults that are poisoning this kid for Michael Jackson because this helped Miguel and Diana. I mean, Frankie had to have been inside his classrooms smelling that of an anal rectum cavity. There's no way that he was countlessly times in class and other students and teachers, the homosexual teachers, gay teachers, smelled it and didn't want to do it or say anything. There's no doubt. And, because, Frankie, I remember, when we were in our house and everything that had happened, Sarah was turning me against Frankie because the only, you know how they say that sometimes you should be very careful in life because it may be the last time you ever talk to people in life. And you don't want to leave off on a fat butt, on a bad note. You don't want to leave off on a bad note in life because, even in relationships, which I don't know nothing about because I've never had a real girlfriend, your words have a lot of power to them, and you can say things that are irreversible to a partner, to someone. They're absolutely irreversible to repair. You could say shit. If you're creative enough, you can say things that are irreversibly unrepairable. And, when Frankie, because me and Frankie just didn't get along. It wasn't any of that. But you have to understand that, everyone thought and everyone thinks, and Barack Obama and George Bush implement on this mindset, and they're going to force it this way, that I was just some kid just showing up every once in a while. And I really didn't know what the fuck was going on. And I was just looking to see where I can get a free ride and have a good time. And that wasn't the case. I mean, I had Frankie clocked pretty well. I had Frankie clocked pretty well to understand his routines, what he did very well. When I left, when I went to the movies with a friend, when Julian came home from school, hey, I'm going to leave. Can you take care of Julian? And you're going to take care of Julian, right? Okay, I got to go. I just want to make sure Julian's not left alone. Okay, and then I leave. Or there was pizza, because in our house, we grew up in such a small house that when somebody ordered pizza, which is very rare, everybody in the house was like, oh, we got good food, we got fancy food, like pizza, right? But pizza to everyone else is a regular, but in our house, we didn't have that kind of luxury. It wasn't, pizza, we maybe ordered a pizza like once every 6 months. Like maybe that. And so there was a lot of things that, when we picked up the phone, but you got to understand that the foundation of that structure, much of it got built when my dad's suicide happened. That Frankie knew that other family members, especially them, and you got to understand that the president and all that, they don't care. They're going to make up a story, and they want to feel sorry for an old bitch, and for Kenneth Cooper, because this feels sorry for white power, this feels sorry for, this is not racist, this feels sorry because he did a favor for the black niggas. No, he's just Mexican now. They're going to keep making stories. It's never going to end. So I can always, as smart as I can be about these circumstances, to tell you and how truthful, no one's listening to, no one care. But for me, it is to have those types of emotions rewired to tell you something else, that's not what happened, is much of the story of a Nazi German. When the Holocaust survivor showed up to our high school and he said, if there was one thing I wanted to say, I wanted to say the truth, that this is what really happened. These people and these Nazis, these Germans and these Nazis made all the lies you could ever imagine about what had happened to me and what happened to my family. And he talked about, and it was one thing that I want you to say, is I wanted here to be able to speak for them. And I wanted to tell you what really happened and the brutality of their actions and their decisions they did to us. And this guy was talking about heads being exploded against poles and shit. People being shot, guttered out in the streets like nothing. Like, you know, and you understand the brutality of a president saying, you know, fuck your mother and fuck your life. I make up whatever I want. And there's all you have is left is sort of this memory. And then they change that memory. And then you believe the God that they tell you to believe in, because you want the pain is and the anguish of it is so hopeless. You're going to ultimately want to search for a higher power, and the president tells you who that higher power is, the structure of that, and everything. Therefore, equaling to controlling your afterlife and experience entirely, dominating God in its existence entirely, because it's over a long stretch of control. And you know, it's difficult because, you know, when, you know, because everybody knows that Sarah Cooper's going to want to, they're psychologists and all this, they know they have to be the brunt of the trash can to give it to Kenneth, because it's about feeling sorry for Kenneth and that pig motherfucker. And nobody knows, you know, every time that you can't talk about your stories, every time that you can't say this and this, guess who's going to get it? And who has a hip-hop station with my blacks, you know what I'm saying? We get down, you know, you know, travel the world. Oh, you hit, you know, get on TV when I'm on my prime, you know, I get down, you know what I'm saying? Right, yeah. Like, it's a TV show. Frankie, you know, let's just say that's what had happened. How does it correlate to this tragedy, to who's going to get what? Right? You already raped me with a transgender. I'm almost 100% sure that you infected me with the HIV virus. That's why everything that's going on. That's why there's nothing left. I'm 42 years old. You know, it's very sad, you know, because these people had money. And there were other people that had money that did this. And they knew that my mother, I'm telling you, like if there was a table full of hundreds of trillions of dollars and my mother was the owner of that table, there's no more of a treasured price that someone could have to target my mother, because they know they can take that table and that money all away from her. They know that she has enough mental capacity to make decisions for yourself, to then not get it blamed on you whenever you outsmart her, because she has so much abuse and so much such a low education, and you experience a brutality that's the nature of your life, just only severe abuse, and take whatever you want, and then somebody buys you out. You know, it's very sad, because like when I look at my mother and I see her eyes getting glossy, and you know, we're at McDonald's, you know, it's all about Sarah Cooper and Kenneth, how he became hip-hop, and he's a forgiveness story, and he just, you know, transgender community for Barack Obama. You know, it's so brutal, you know, because I watched Frankie's behavior, you know, and it's very brutal. I mean, it's, you know, no kid should have to go through that. You know, hearing the screams of what had happened is, you know, having to understand that, you know, even if you take me out of the picture, Frankie knows that my mother's behavior is acknowledging at some given understanding that you are allowing this to happen to me. but you give me food and you give me shelter. So when his understanding is that when he goes about his business, he understands that he's looking at a mother that fucking brutally had him raped in a room when that Jesus guy showed up. You know, he's walking home from school, and my mom says, "Oh, ¿qué te pasó, Frankie? ¿Estás bien?" "No, I'm okay, Mom. No, okay." All these layers that you should be talking about of your experiences, day after day. Him coming out of his room knowing that, knowing that me and my mother were in the kitchen while this was happening to him. You know, me and my mom, in the fucking car whenever Lee Cha's husband rapes Frankie or does some sort of rapes Frankie. So it's very hard. I have to do as they tell me to do, and how I'm being trained in order, and that is just Jesus and God. There's nothing, and it's so bad that you, especially now I'm my age and all that's happened to me, I have to find a source, in the Lord and God for my problems, because the people that are doing this are coming from Lucifer, from Satan, and Barack Obama, George Bush, and his team, and they're not going to stop, and it never did, and he didn't rule out hammering punishment more than he did on me. He doesn't care. People are dying all the time. People are sick all the time. That lottery ticket became his lottery ticket. My lottery, me meeting Michael Jackson lottery ticket, and then Frankie's lottery ticket. No, that's Sarah and Kenneth's 97.9 The Beat lottery ticket. No, that's President Barack Obama's lottery ticket. And when he's ready to pull it out, he'll pull it out. It's it's because it's my brother. I got into one argument with him, and nobody and everybody thinks I'm after money. Whenever I'm sitting there and I'm talking to him, and I'm like, I'm about to die. I'm gonna go through have a transplant, and I'm telling him what happened to Dad's money. What happened to Dad? Because all I'm thinking is we just threw Dad away in a fucking trash can. We just threw him away and took his fucking money. What the fuck? We're family. What the fuck's going on? Who's, And Frankie doesn't, we get into a light argument, and and then he just starts going back to my mom's house. I drop him off at the end of the street. And the magnitude, because then he is going to directly put his ammunition toward me to gratify himself. And the psychologists don't care about, they know what's going to happen. Sarah knows what was going to happen. When you take if you find somebody, just say Frankie's perfectly fine. If you find Frankie to say, "Oh, I'm perfectly good, I'm healthy, he's just working out, he's healthy, everything's just good, it's just, he had a little bit of punishment." That's exactly what Kenneth wants. Because all that trash shit is going to pick up my trash shit, and all the passive, it's for them. That's who it was for. That's exactly what he did. And then it'll skewer my mother. It's just, the psychologists understand this, and whoever's controlling the circumstances, they know this. They exactly know how to put the chess pieces up, and this is this is a mega Powerball millionaire win. But, as far as this situation, looking at it from what I saw and what I was there the whole time. I was there. Sarah Cooper was not there. Kenneth Cooper at 97.9 The Beat, you were not there. I was. You did not feel emotions there. You did not hero. You did not do nothing. That was me. is, you know, that was what that was the truth. That's what happened, you know, with those circumstances. And it's, you know, for all those experiences to have to go through, that's exactly what somebody would want, because it cleans up the fucking shit they, you know, the shit they wiped all over the fucking walls. That's what they fucking did. You know, it's horrible, you know. I try not to think about it and hope that just Frankie's, you know, whatever, healthy and just living his family. This is something that he probably wanted more than anything, is having his own family, obviously. Is to have something of his own family, because he's kind of the family-oriented person. You know, all these details, you know, like these shutters, these quick references, all these things, all lead to a story and picture that entirely makes sense to what was going on. And there's nothing that you can do, because this was about Keno, 97 on the beat for his niggas, and then Barack Obama and George Bush. And it's like, you know, I have a dead sister. I have a sister that passed away, like a movie I saw, you know, this sad movie I saw in the shack. You know, I have my mom's daughter living next door, a dead sister. That why this is happening to Frankie. You know, this little girl is there living there she's living there since I was about 7 or 8 years old. So many of these rapes was why that little girl was living right over there. Like, you know, and they did it on purpose. You know, this is a conspiracy. You know, this is a conspiracy of murder of the government, you know, coming after me and everything that had happened. It's exactly what it is. You know, how could you have all this attention and then someone entirely finds somebody that's infected with the HIV virus, that's a transgender, and you shoot the hell out of me with electronic devices until I get raped and infect me? Oh, it's because of Michael Jackson. Oh, it's because of Barack Obama. No, it's because of George. But, you know, it all leads, I'm telling you that it all leads to Jesus and God, because there's, you know, there's no choice. There's no free religion. There's no nothing. You know, other people can have freedom of religion. Mine has been completely stripped through the power of Barack Obama and, for, you know, George Bush, the orders that they gave and their political powers of the president. You know, this dictatorship of what they're running. Like Saddam Hussein, you know, they just start picking out people who dies and who gets murdered and who gets killed. That's exactly what they do. No different. They just pick out who dies, who gets murdered, and make it look like a president. Bullshit. And that's what they do. They don't do anything else. You know, they want a woman, they want a faggot, they want a pretty boy model to screw, just 19 years old. Yeah, fuck them. You will never know about it. They get anything they want. That's the government and president. That's what they do. They get anything. They want $100 million free in their bank accounts, and they get a free $100 million in their bank account. That they get anything they want. It's a dictatorship. You know, it's no kid should ever have to go through that. You know, no, that is such brutal. You know, because he doesn't have any friends. And so when he goes into his room, and, you know, I walk in there a couple times, he's doing his math, and he's like crying because he's just having such a hard time. He's kneeling on the ground, kind of like, you know, squatting on the ground, and one knee on the ground, one knee kind of leaning against his chest, looking at his math, and he goes like, oh, like, and he's just like straining, and there's no telling what his story was to what the teachers were doing to him. Because I could tell you this, Frankie does not have the vocabulary and ability to vocally speak in great detail as much as I would want to be doing, or I can. Frankie's won't be doing that. In fact, he's been trained the majority of his life to keep his mouth shut. So therefore, and so when you have all these experiences, you know, especially how brutal it is, who's really getting the trophies? Who really had the good life? Who really had the good life? Who got the dignity? Who got the treasures of life that unimaginable? You know, they changed the reward, what I was supposed to get from Frankie and doing to help my mother. Then, oh, okay, well, you got to live. That's your reward. Oh no, that you just got to change your perspective. Oh no, you don't get money. You get this. I was getting 40 fucking tickets by the age of 25, being arrested, thrown against fucking cars all the time, and then threatened by my co-workers. You don't do what I tell you to because the gay community's in control. We're going to go after you when we use the gays. And that's what they did. But it doesn't change anything. So, as far as I have anything to say with this, it's like, it's very sad, because my mother, I don't think my mother would want to talk about it anymore. She's too old. She's too old because the psychologist mapped out her brain to whatever it is that they want to place it to help Sarah, because that's all my mother's twin is doing. Like, I'm talking to my mother's twin right now, and I've been talking to her, both of the twins, never my biological mother. And every time that I go over there, and every time I talk to them on the phone, in person, all these years, whether they're getting used to me and kind of know my character and kind of get just used to being around me, who I was or who I am, just in general, just a general broad idea of it, they weren't there for any of it when I was young. They weren't there for any of it. Frankie doesn't have a relationship with them. Julian didn't have a relationship with them when my mother didn't move out of our house until I was 16 years old. So the entire teenage life Frankie had, and majority all of that I had, they weren't there. They weren't there of the survival stories that Frankie was having to go through. Like, Frankie would be the only person that could probably tell you the best remembrances of all the horrific things. Because I want to say there was more than once that Miguel and Diana showed up at McDonald's punking out my mother. And the first time that I remember, I was like 6 or 7 years old. And Miguel and Diana, were there, and Diana was bullying my mother. You got to understand, why are you? Most of the time, if a transgender bullies a woman, she'll always understand that to stay away from that bitch. She will always do that. Why is my mom talking to her every single day in front of our driveway? And you don't understand, she's making fun of my mother the entire time. The entire time, she's sizing my mother up in the most disgusting, unimaginable ways you can imagine. And she's almost kind of like, it's unbelievable, but I think it's important for me to talk about because, that's exactly what the gay community would want, because they can shuffle that because he's gay. I was the only straight child, but it's very sad because the situation of what he went through as a kid and what my mother had to witness and do, and those interpretations now become entirely for the president and profitable lottery ticket for them. A lot of the sacred emotions and what my mother wanted, how she behaved, and how she explained to me how our personal family structures were, completely get erased. This is the same feeling that I understood symptoms of it from what I would come closest to as is this guy that lived in the Holocaust. He said that everything that he ever known was completely wiped out. Every body was completely wiped out. The memories, every person you've ever known, completely wiped out. Rearranged to a new existence without the people that you once knew. And, they kept on putting propaganda out there. This is what happened. No, this has never happened. It never happened. No, it did. That's exactly the hatred and the distributed things, because he managed to survive. And let me tell you something about this guy. I have good reasons to believe that I think this guy, he knew about Miguel and Diana. He knew about what had happened to me. Because there were, when I saw this guy, there was something about him and his behavior that seemed to acknowledge that he knew me already. And it, and I say this because, this guy saw brutality of Holocaust. See, this guy was in, this guy was in the Holocaust, this was a genocide of 1 million people being murdered and killed. And this guy I remember him sort of like he was aware of me from a prior situation that he knew about Miguel and Diana. He knew that there was a lot of shit that was going on with this. So, it is, time passed by in these circumstances, but that's the best way I could explain it, because they wiped out they made up stories. I'm old now. There's no justice. The parasitical things, they don't care. They just use psychology and rearrange this shit. They don't, they have plenty of money. They're driving brand new cars. This motherfucker's getting placed in New York on television. Let me tell you how awful this gets. When Michael Jackson showed up into the picture, how do you know Robert in New York? How do you know he didn't profit off of it? Where some homosexual multimillionaire knew about Robert Palomo, and that's why they recruited Robert Palomo, and became a millionaire doing royal weddings. How do you know someone didn't do that over there like they did my Aunt Joni? And there was a millionaire that called her. She found the ad in a newspaper or some shit like that, and she's living in a $10 million house, a little blind girl, living in a $10 million house to herself. I mean, I'm telling you, I talked about this story before. When I walked into this house, it couldn't have been. Have you ever imagined like a little kid having a whole mansion to herself only, and she was the only child of a mother and a father? That's it. The mother and the father. She was the only child, and that house was all to herself. Like, she had a nanny, my Joni. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like, you could see like a couple chairs, where the father would read the newspaper or probably read a book, and the wife would lay down on a couch, a sofa to read a book as well. And this little kid had an entire mansion. I mean, the walls were padded, so there was no walls, so she could walk freely on this feathered, grounded carpet. It was insane looking. I mean, this little kid had, and I remember very distinctively when I fell on my knees and I walked into that room, I immediately, within just seconds of after just observing everything, being wowed, I thought of this little girl that lived next door to me, not knowing that it was my sister. And I thought, how can this isn't fair. Why is nobody doing about this? Why is this kid, grabbing vomit off the fucking floor and putting it in their mouth and shit, shitting and pissing herself? Nobody cares. And this little girl was disabled and had a $10 million mansion. And, when I remember just looking, and I remember feeling, sort of emotion about it. I remember thinking of God. I remember very vividly thinking of like, why would God allow this? This isn't right. This isn't right. You have all these things, and look what's happening right there. And what's so crazy about the circumstances? Well, I wasn't thinking about that girl at all during that time. Wasn't talking a conversation about the girl. I don't know if anything could have triggered it. My aunt said that, I don't recall, but there's nothing. I'm very evident about this mentally. There was nothing to say that I remember. There was no conversation. I didn't even know this was my sister. The entire way there, when we got into the house, there was no conversation about nothing. For some weird reason, it was very weird. when I'm walking into this princess-like made room, like falling on the knees on the ground just to touch the carpet and just the padding on the ground. And I was like, wow. I was like, what what kind of people live here? Who lives on carpet like this? And, and almost, and for some, it was very weird because I wasn't thinking of, because I remember sort of having this sort of profound experience, and I remember thinking of God. I remember thinking, why would God allow some girl like just to get trashed like that? Like, and I remember just looking at like that little girl's right there, and I wasn't thinking about this rich little girl, blind girl, this white family that lived here. I was thinking about, wow, what was happening right there? I was like, this little girl should have a room like this. But yeah, but that's the story, Thought I'd talk about that for a minute. But yeah, it's a very disturbing situation. I can't do it without God, without the Lord. Even though I smoke and I don't drink anymore, I'm not a lot of exercise, and everything they've taken away and all the jewels far greater than. I wish I had the ability to poetically express those emotions, how painful and how stripping and robbing they were, and how most of all how wrongfully it was taken from us and me, and what had happened. If something happened to me like that, I wouldn't want Sarah to have a fucking penny. I wouldn't want Kenneth to have a fucking penny. I would want it to go to Frankie or Julian, or to Frankie and my mother properly. They went through. It's a brutality. It's a very brutal, very, very brutal. You have all these celebrities that have all these millions, regardless of whatever you're changing the country or whatever the fuck it is that they're doing. The story's never going to get told because they don't care about the details. That's my life and what had happened, and they want to pick up the shit because they pick out who feels sorry for who and who gets the money. And they took everything away from me and stripped everything. So, but anyway, it's very brutal. So I think it's important for me to talk about because every day it's consistently a waking up about how everyone's cherishing and doing a forgiveness for Kenneth Cooper and trying to pick up their shit of what these parasitical motherfuckers are instead of putting justice to it. Instead of throwing them in prison, see what it is to live in a cage. See what it is to actually do to real men when they put you in a fucking cage around fucking crazy motherfuckers, just as crazy as whatever put you there, if not 10 times more. What that's going to do to your brain, 4 walls nonstop, with a faggot security guard, it's a prejudice world. It's very sad because my mother would have wanted me to say these things. My mother would have wanted me to at least say the justice of these patterns, to make the most of it, to try to reach out, and it's too late. It is much, whatever mansion they built and whatever it is they made excuses for, nobody understood what I went through. I'm 27 years old working for the federal government, and I have someone playing, Sarah Cooper, and I'm walking into a fucking house. I'm walking into a fucking mansion, and they're trying to rent out a room, and it's like a 11-bedroom mansion. And all the kids live in all these fucking rooms, and she's taking me to all these fucking rooms just to look at the house. I know nothing about any of this. And being persecuted in these circumstances. When I go to my job site and I don't talk about Miguel, no, they're talking about Miguel. And they're throwing the shit on me. And they're acting on that immediately toward me. When I don't talk about Frankie and I don't talk about what's happening to my mother and all the details that are piling, they're coming at me at Advance Online. Monica Ramirez thinks she's Sarah Cooper and is playing mother on me while I'm Advanced Graphics, and so is Gary Gwynn Chart. I mean, it's non-stop. Standard register. Nobody cares. But they threw all this shit on me because that money bought everything out. You know, I thought I'd talk about it. You know, I can't do it alone. You know, I have to find a source of, it just feels better with Jesus and God, you know, the Lord, you know, because there's no fixing. It's just a horrific situation of so much selfish, so much greed, so self-absorbed, energetically, like a parasitical fucking, you know, Grim Reaper, just looking to take souls and as energy fuel for himself, for herself, to make sure they get what they fucking want out of the better life. They don't give a fuck and will lie to you in every way that you can. Just feel sorry for me, Kenneth Cooper, 97. Feel sorry for me. No, I'm such a man. I'm a real man. No, I'm going to do this. And I took care of her spirit. I'm going to chisel away some of that spirit. And then I play woman, Virgin Mary, Sarah Cooper. I mean, it's just nonstop. Like, it's so parasitical. Like, I can't even tell you some of the things I want to talk about and put it on camera about what I think and what's happening. Because it's just too toxic and it becomes too dangerous, because the people that are listening to these videos and my conversation this entire time are then using it against me to retaliate and lie again. And so therefore it's very easy for me to let God and the Lord accept that there's a higher power than me that I like to think and play imaginary with in this, you know, the God realm, that human beings have souls, as little as that may feel and seem, because of the President Barack Obama and George Bush and their team about what they did to me. You know, how fragile life is. You know, you don't have no idea how fragile your life is until you meet scum like that in life. Until you meet worthless people that are willing to, that can, if you think you're important in life and what these motherfuckers do on a snap of a finger, they are the people in Auschwitz that with a snap of a finger, they determine life or death. You go to the left, you go to the right, you death to the chambers, just killing children and all. It doesn't hurt them, they don't cry, they don't feel emotion. They only look for attention. They're egomaniacs. They're parasitical. They work with under the devil's authority. That's who they fucking work for. Nobody in their right mind thinking that they could even come close to what it is to be normal would allow something like this to happen continuously. Just nonstop. Oh, it just let me say fancy words and make an excuse, and that's what they're going to do. That's exactly what they're going to do. Well, I just didn't know what was going on, and you did know what's going on because, it's, you know, your secret society, you know, the government, you know, they tell you the secrets of the background. They tell you the secrets of how things go. You know, they did the favor. You know the favor for your transgender daughter. Yeah, it's transgender rape. Yeah, and then Kenneth rape. You know, oh, it's just, and they just nonstop. It never stops. So it's better ultimately to leave it to the Lord and God to. I'm having to touch the screen because they keep calling me, harassing me. These spam risk phones. So, anyway, I thought I would make a video on that, but it's very frightening. You know, nobody cares about. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. You know. Like, I'm speaking to Lindsay Wessinger for the last 7 years. And it wasn't up until a couple years after talking, or the first couple weeks after talking to her, when I was like 34, I'm telling you, I'm, and she's a lesbian, okay? And to my understanding, she's a twin for sure, 100% on that. And she charged at me over at 24-hour fitness, and this is what I'm talking about. I was very distinctively, when she did that, I remember thinking, I need to stay away from my mother. I better not, because there's someone else that wants to control her. And she's part of that team. She's part of them over there that wants to manipulate and control my mother and what's going on there. Because whatever she has, whatever it is, they want and put it on their table. And they're going to manipulate, and they did. And I remember that very distinctively, thinking, I kind of got withdrawn back a little bit, kind of like, I don't know, I'm just gonna, I don't think it's good for me to talk to my mother. They're in control, and it was very weird, because I was getting something to drink, go work out a little bit, take a walk to the fountain, get something to drink, kind of hydrate, take a little bit of a walk. And I remember thinking of that. How much is this playing a role in other circumstances to why I'm not communicating with my mother, and all this Michael Jackson, Frankie being raped, $1 Million Mansion, identical twins, my mom's triplets. How does this all play a part of this? Because there's so many teams against me. Imagine what they did to Frankie as a little kid. Frankie's never going to be able to tell you that. That is the real nightmare. He's never going to, go into extreme details like I am able to in vocabulary words. Frankie doesn't read books at all. He doesn't read books of poetic to express. He's not the artistic piano player, the Taylor Swift singer that just thinks of dreams and all this other shit. He's not that of character of a person. So, he's not going to be able to express and tell you everything that happened in his classrooms, when he was getting on the bus, when he was in middle school, when he was in high school, when he was in first grade, when he was in second grade, when he was in third grade and he went to the zoo on a field trip. Somebody used a fucking, a monkey, a tiger fucking monkey, that was in a cage locked, chained to somebody's leash, and they used it you started lunging at Frankie, while they're on the zoo trip, so to ward off Miguel and the neighbor, and nobody knew about it. Or Frankie's walking out the tickets of the Dallas Zoo, and the booth ticket lady scares Frankie, and he's 7 or 8 years old. This is when he's getting raped, and they take onto themselves that they're Miguel and Diana just to think that they're helping protect Frankie. But Frankie feels that in the very moment that it's happening. And the very moment that he's there, he's feeling is as threatening as as a kid would be scared. But the trains into the fact that they knew about it, because all this gossip is going around, is doing this to him. And they're like, oh, I'm just playing mother with him. I'm just, I'm protecting him. Yeah, we're going to control Miguel and Diana. Stick with little kid. Yeah, and so, yeah. But you're scaring that what he's going through is so much more different. Or a story that he tells you, it had to have been endless stories. I mean, it was, you go to, you're eating at a restaurant, you feel uncomfortable where you're sitting because you're having bowel movement problems, you're just a kid. You don't want to do that in front of other kids. You want to be cool. You want to have friends. You don't want to be left out. No, this is about Kenneth and hip hop, how he had, head cracking my game, you know what I'm saying? Getting down with 50 Cent, Dr. Dre, and headbeat phones, you know what I'm saying? Oh, forgiveness from me, This is none of that shit. Like, walking home was a painful struggle in itself. When he thinks about cartoons, how does he relate to them, to what's happening to him? when he watches a TV show on how a mother is caring for her child and it's a heartwarming story, how does that relate to him, to what he thinks of my mother? Because remember, he partially knows my mother has now allowed for him to get raped. But he understands that mom doesn't just know, because we knew, I'm telling you, I grew up with him. Now, how do you know I'm telling you the truth and this is just not what Sarah Cooper just did, and she applies that nasty shit on me and throws it on me? Yeah, you see how that works right there? Poison over here, poison over there. Yeah, you too, huh? Like, but how are you supposed to explain these stories? Who's going to be explaining? He's not going to. And if he's sick, guess what? You know, the intensity would happen in, because for me, I have to go through, there's thousands of incidences that I can't tell you enough that I'm going through school. That I'm going through school and this is happening. And someone's harassing me again. Someone's giving me a call right now. But anyway, how do you know what these experiences are? How does it relate these experiences, thinking of his mother, and he sees a heartwarming story, what we see on TV, but look what your mother's doing. How are you training him for this explosive harm that you're ultimately going to do to your own brothers and to your own mother, thinking Barack Obama's just making you a goddamn fucking hero, and that isn't the case. But like I said, I don't know the circumstances. Either way, it's a tragedy beyond anything I can express, because the time is gone. Any type of hobbies that I could have done for myself, all gone. And the treasurable moments of youth, having my hair all black and youth and vital, and when I'm fresh and young and have children and future wives or girlfriends, all of it's trashed. Nobody cared. And they did this, they cared enough to take that away from me, and to intentionally take that away from me, as to more to think that they wanted to do anything for me. So, it's difficult, because my mother is nothing more than a fucking guinea pig, and nothing more than a fucking table full of money. Whether that's money of emotion for Sarah, money for cash money to buy cars, or money in exchange for the president, for political power, or balances of what you got, and then just who gets a piece of the cake of my dead sister. Who controls their spirit? Who owns their spirit? Who gets to attach themselves energetically to that spirit? Who gets the most best out of that? Who gets to shun that, so that when it gets thrown, that garbage shit gets thrown at me, it's fucking spitted at, disgusted at me by Sarah Cooper, because it was just the psychologist and everyone else that did it for her. That's all my mother is. I watch this behavior, how she's acting. I know all the details. Very profound. When I'm, watch my mother care for this child, but she can't do anything about it. If I don't feel bad enough about what I have to do to Frankie, now I have a dead child to remind me in front of the house is just throwing up and shitting. And a very disabled child. She can't do anything. But it's about Kenneth. Remember how important Kenneth is. I told you the president, Bush and Barack Obama for showing up like that. I'm telling you, they're lying and they're making up stories. The group of all these people, not just them, but it's the group of huge amounts of people, their team efforts to come and swarm and do all this bad for Michael Jackson and the political motions of, Barack Obama for the niggas, and for the whites. They don't claim, they don't think. Let me tell you how disgusting this is. Sarah Palin, who looked exactly like Sarah Cooper, was at the government's office, putting on a show there, and rubbing it in my face, directly about my dead sister. I swear to fucking God, I promise to God that this is what they were doing. I control her dead spirit, and I'm the one who owns her spirit, and I let you have someone that's, and here's a fucking dead body on you. You see how I own it? Like, this is what the entire attitude was when I got there. And it's just, they're making up story who the hero was, and it was just, it's unbearable, you know, because when I was a kid, I never got into fights with Frankie when I was a kid. There was never violence, ever. It was, you know, obviously teenage stuff a few times, but there wasn't fighting as kids when I was 9, 10, 11. There was never fighting with us, you know, but, we can all believe in something, but it is more important to have faith, because your beliefs can be broken. I believed I was going to get this. I believe this is what, I thought I was going to get, and really the truth was that Kenneth was the hero. I believed that Miguel was the hero. I believe that whatever that is can be broken, but it's more better and important than anything else is to have faith. Faith that God exists. Because even if he didn't, he didn't. But if he did, it'll be more in your favor.